Welcome to the Rewired Eating Podcast. My name, of course, is Ian Bickle, and today we're talking diet culture with the wonderful Sophie Medlin. So let's get straight into it. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Rewired Eating Podcast. I am hugely honored today to be joined by a lady that I have followed for many years now, and I think is just a wealth of knowledge and doing a great job in this diet space. She is a beacon of hope, a lighthouse, hopefully bringing people together. And I just want to share Sophie Medlin today with everyone on the podcast. So thank you very much for joining me, Sophie.
Thank you for having me, Ian. What a lovely introduction. I really appreciate that.
I do owe you an apology because the inconvenience my wife and daughter caused. We had a podcast booked nearly 2 years ago now, and my wife decided to go into labour. But yeah, so we'll let her off though. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Very selfish, but I will let her off. It's one of the better excuses I've had for people messing around my diary anyway, Ian. I
Yeah, I
don't.
did send you were one of the first people to get a picture of my daughter
Oh,
though.
so
So
nice.
there you go. Sophie, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Sophie Medlin. I am a consultant colorectal dietitian, which means that in my clinical practice, I mainly specialize in what my friend very cleverly calls butts and guts. So I talk about poo all day as part of my clinical practice. I've been a dietitian for 17 years, so I've been around for a while in this industry. I started out working in the NHS, which is what most dietitians do. And for those who don't know, dietitians are like the medical nutrition people. So we focus primarily on managing health problems through diet. Um, I worked in the NHS. I was then an academic, so I was a lecturer and researcher for 5 years, most recently at King's College in London. And now I run my private practice, which is called City Dietitians, and we've got a team of 12 dietitians, all with highly specialist interests in different areas of dietetics. So from kind of diabetes to bowel problems to some really specific stuff, celiac disease, children's allergies, skin problems, that sort of thing. I also have the honor of doing consultancy for businesses. So I design products, probiotics, vitamin products, functional food products, that kind of thing. And I also work with the media, which is how Ian and I know each other. So not only social media, but I've also been able to be on Channel 4, delivering some really exciting stuff around gut health and all sorts of other things in that kind of space. So yeah, it keeps me busy and I've got my finger in lots of pies.
Yes, yes. Know your shit. Is that the
That's
the
right.
Channel
Yeah.
4? Yes, I love that. So we're gonna probably maybe touch a little bit on gut health and IBS, but today I want to primarily focus on like diet culture as a whole
Yeah.
because me working in the space that I work in, I just see it all of the time, and this is typically the type of client that I work with is somebody that is just so lost, confused, conflicted. Um, before I get into that though, what got you into this as a whole anyway? Like Sophie, is this
Yeah.
something you've always wanted to do or?
Yeah, I was a weird 15-year-old that knew I wanted to be a dietitian. I was very lucky. I was doing catering at GCSE. I think you can still do it as a GCSE now. And my catering teacher was a nutritionist actually. And excuse me, we did a module or a session on adapting diets for people who are on a gluten-free diet. And I really liked it, I really enjoyed it. And my catering teacher said, look, you're good at science and you like food, and I think you should think about a career in nutrition. And I'm forever grateful to that because I've had a fantastic career, I was continue to have a fantastic career. I'm very lucky and I love everything that I do. I think when I was 15, I had no idea really what I was letting myself into. And if you'd have told me, in 17 years you'd be on the TV talking about poo, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. And, I'm very grateful for it all. And yeah, I'm very lucky to really feel passionately about everything I do. And I've done a lot of campaigning, continue to do a lot of campaigning about diet culture and breaking down diet culture and trying to support people to understand that it's really all about your relationship with food and your body and not about, all of the other things that social media would have you believe.
Yeah, I mean, I heard, and I'll link it into the show notes, your podcast on the digital detox
Yeah,
podcast, which is just fairly, you were the first guest or so, weren't you?
yeah,
And
that's right. Yeah.
I've sent that to so many clients
Nice.
and shared it because I just think it's phenomenal. And I think the more we can get this message out, and even if it's saying the same things a million times over and over again, if you're on 10 podcasts saying the same thing, does it get boring for you?
No, I love it. I love it. I'm very lucky. And I think I get the opportunity, everyone's got a slightly different take on things. Everyone feels it has a kind of slightly different perspective on things. And I think I feel really lucky to be able to share the messages and get them out there. And, this is the one of two podcasts I'm doing today. And the more I can do it and the more I can, reach people and support people, the better it suits me. And hopefully it helps everybody else as well.
Well, coincidentally, I trained as a chef when I
Yes.
was like 18 or so. So catering is the way into nutrition,
Yeah.
apparently. So
So,
it's
yeah.
it's funny how it comes full circle, isn't it? Um, in terms of diet culture, like, is there, I mean, what is your interpretation of that term as a whole? Where do we even start with that?
Yeah, good question. I think diet culture is linked to society's preoccupation with thinness. So the idea that thinness is a priority over and above anything else, over and above health and everything else. I think it's the kind of upholding of thinness as the ideal. And I think what diet culture does then is sell us products and services to make us thin or to try and make us thin, when in reality it's all a con, because in the end you end up trying and failing in inverted commas on so many different diets. And if dieting worked, then you would only need one diet for the rest of your life. And this is where we're trying to dismantle the idea that thinness is the priority over and above health. We're trying to dismantle the idea that diets are something we should be sold and advertised and promoted, and then trying to think about all the products that go into that space, the industry behind it in terms of supplements and drugs and all sorts of things that we can get into today. There's so many things linked into that. People are making so much money preying on vulnerable people, and there is unfortunately a desperation in that space because of how society tells us that thinness is such an important priority for everybody, or should be such an important priority for everybody. And really interestingly, we've seen this, women are starting to understand and reject diet culture, but it seems to me, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on it, Ian, that men are just starting to cotton onto this, and the preoccupation with muscularity and the way that men look has suddenly become even more of a priority within the space. So now we're not only fighting for women, but we're also fighting for men not to go down the same horrible hole that women have been stuck in for such a long time.
Hmm. I certainly think it's a maturity thing. If you tell people when they're in the 20s, like what's potentially going to happen, you're just quite like gung ho with it all. You're like, oh, I'm not bothered. But when people are sitting mid 30s, 40s, and beyond, and they're thinking, I've literally tried everything.
Yeah.
Um, Guys are funny. I think like I work with, I don't know, I'd love to think I do have some male followers as well. People listen to the podcast, and I do speak to guys as well. But I think there's just I don't know, women seem to just be a little bit more open in
Yeah.
my eyes than guys a lot of the time. But I would say I've got more of a feminine energy anyway, even though like I've bodybuilding, all of this sort of stuff. But I don't mind sharing that, just saying, hey, listen, I appreciate the softer side of things. And it's
Yeah.
not just thinness, it's like fitness now. You mentioned there, like um getting bigger and muscular, and women as well are now, that culture is changing towards very much the aesthetic, strong toned, muscular woman. Is that something that you've noticed the culture changing more into?
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things that concerns me is the number of female influencers who have had an eating disorder, anorexia, for example, so preoccupation with thinness, who simply switch those behaviors into muscularity. So, being muscular. So they, to all intents and purposes, look healthier. But in fact, all of the behaviors, the preoccupation, the obsession, the counting, the checking everything, the fixation with exercise, it's all the same problem. They just look healthier, and now they are, upheld as a standard of health, I guess. And that's, a real worry for me and other people in the dietetics community.
I suppose it masks it and almost like legitimizes it when they
Yeah.
attach a label to it. I know because obviously I have a history in bodybuilding.
Mm.
The whole intention of prepping for a show is to lose substantial amounts of body
Mm.
fat, and you can legitimize your and hide your disorder by just saying, "Oh, I'm prepping for a show,"
Yeah.
and everybody just all of a sudden goes, "Oh, Right, that's fine.
Yeah.
Where it's secretly deep down, those people are like just trying to find a way to shrink their body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would suggest, and you'll know more about this than I do, Ian, I would suggest there is a huge amount of eating disorders and disordered eating within the bodybuilding community itself. And then I would suggest also that it's probably quite difficult to get out of that mindset once you've been in it, especially if you've been in it for a number of years. If you do one or two competitions, maybe it's a bit different. But if that's been your career, or that's been something you've been doing for a long time, switching your view out of that into normal, healthy, balanced eating that doesn't involve huge fluctuations in your body fat percentage must be really difficult for people.
Yeah, I think for me, I was lucky in 2014 as a natural bodybuilder actually failing a drugs test.
Mm.
And test A, the urinalysis test, came back inconclusive, which is technically a failure. Hadn't said I'd got out in my system. Test B said I didn't have anything in my system. But the amount of shame that I felt from my community
Yeah.
of bodybuilders, and that was just so jarring for me. That was 10 years ago. And it was like, whoa, this is not my identity. And that's such a problematic thing people can get into because they create an identity around this thing which has an appearance attached.
Yeah.
Is that something that you see really problematic?
Absolutely. I think the biggest kind of correlation I can draw to that would actually be people who I work with who have got something like inflammatory bowel disease, so Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, where their gut doesn't work. And very often that compromises your ability to absorb nutrition. You'll probably have long periods of time with malabsorption, so diarrhea and things like that, that create weight loss. And then when people are sickest, they're usually at their thinnest. And very often at that point where you're very vulnerable, psychologically, physically, everything else, people will say to you, well, at least you're thin. I wish I could have what you've got for a few days so I can lose some weight. This idea that your thinness is the only good thing that you've got going on in that moment. And then when people recover and they gain some weight, often they really hate their bodies, even though their body's been through so much and saved their life and been incredible. And now they're healthy because they're heavier. They find themselves really struggling with that identity. And it's this thing where when you were sick, your identity became at least I'm thin. And then now you feel you've lost that identity, that bit of you, the only bit of you that you felt was good in a time of real crisis. And I think any time that your physique becomes your identity, you've got a real problem on your hands there. And conversely, what we see now, which is super interesting, is plus size influencers and body positivity influencers who do find themselves healthily losing weight for whatever reason that might be, or potentially even unhealthily losing weight because of medications or because they've become sick or whatever it might be. Once their weight starts dropping, people can be incredibly critical of them. They can be rejected from the plus size and body positivity community. And that is also a massive issue. So we've got this, when your body is your identity under any circumstances, you're in trouble for sure, because it changes, bodies change, it's normal, it's natural, and it's, often healthier for your body to change than it is for it to stay the same through your life.
It's like any culture, really. It can become enormously toxic, like the Haze movement, health at every size.
Yeah.
Health at every size to a certain demographic of the Haze community. Um, if you are thin or seem to lose weight, you aren't fully aligned with Haze, which
Yeah.
it's health at every size. Like it
Yeah.
should be about every size, not just
Yeah.
the plus sizes.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, how many years did you say you've been kind of in
17.
this? Wow. So obviously when I was kind of beginning in the fitness industry, like social media, like Facebook, you still wrote your statuses in the third person.
Yeah.
Um, which was really is funny coming up on my memories these days. What have you kind of really noticed like throughout, and how is that like influencing what you see on a kind of clinical level and a practice level?
Yeah. So I think obviously I'd had a good maybe 5 years in industry before social media became a thing, really. Facebook was started when I was at university, kind of in the last year of university, but nothing, I mean, until Instagram took off, the whole diet culture thing wasn't quite as ingrained. We had a very different set of diet culture. It was mainly magazine focused, and certainly through, my mum's generation, for example, thinness was still incredibly important to that generation, and continues to be, unfortunately. But the social media aspect of it kind of wasn't there, obviously. Then I started using social media about 12 years ago, when I started seeing on Facebook people promoting cabbage for like medicinal purposes, and just the stuff started cropping up, which, some of which may come from traditional medicine, which we should respect and try to understand, but a lot of it was just people making stuff up. So I started doing some blogging and stuff like that, and that kind of took off a little bit and grew a bit in that kind of Facebook space. And then obviously we all migrated over to Instagram, where if we remember the beginning of Instagram, there was two kind of big influencers who occupied a lot of the space, certainly the UK space. One was Deliciously Ella, and the other was Joe Wicks, and they were very early into that space, neither of which with any nutrition qualifications or understanding of what they were saying and how it might impact people, and the negative outcomes of, filling your diet full of coconut oil or cutting out dairy from your diet, for example. And then it just, no one was ready for that. No one was ready, and still isn't really ready, for social media to be a public health platform, which it is. And I think up until this point, that public health element of Instagram and social media in general has just grown and grown and grown. And it's a completely unregulated space from a health perspective, which is so scary and dangerous. And there's some really interesting research out of the University of Aberdeen, I think, talking about how not young people 90% of young people say they use social media as a nutrition education platform, and 90% of the information on health on social media is false. So we've got this real problem now, where it's being used so heavily as a inverted commas reliable source of information, when in reality it's not reliable at all. So we've had that kind of revolution, if you like, of people seeing all these bodies that don't look like their body, and people comparing their bodies. We've obviously had this huge, massive increase in eating disorders, particularly throughout the pandemic, which is correlated with increased social media use, which has been a real problem. And one of the things that is important to say is that Meta, who manage Facebook and Instagram, as people probably know, they know that they cause eating disorders. They know they cause problems with body image in young people, but they continue to perpetuate what they perpetuate and blow up photographs and images and the things that are unhelpful for people, and they don't regulate advertising on their spaces. What we also have now is this wave of I don't know how to put them, like maybe medical professional influencers, not only using Facebook, but also getting themselves onto really big podcast platforms, for example, and being able to promote things, incorrect messages, essentially diet culture promoted by maybe an older or middle-aged man who's perhaps a professor or a doctor, who's also selling the same thing, diet culture, just with a very different look and feel, and this kind of perceived scientific basis behind it. And that's an evolution again in and of itself, and that's continuing to grow and be problematic. And I don't know how we regulate people who are already regulated. And I suspect that kind of medical influencer space is going to continue to grow, because people who have a medical qualification, people generally have more faith in. So it's been a real revolution. And the main problems I see now in my practice with social media is people believing every product that's sold on a certain podcast, every person who's on a podcast. And I work with some really high-powered, educated individuals who've read everything they can possibly find on a particular topic, and they're more confused than they were when they didn't know anything about it. And that's because there's so much misinformation and mixed information out there.
Yeah, wow. And you said 97%.
Yeah.
Wow. So like these people who were going on social media, and I'm so glad like social media just didn't exist through,
Same.
and I've got two young children. So I'm like thinking, oh my God, like how do I protect these when they are um going through especially their independent stage, which believe it or not, the 2-year-old is already pretty much it's not quite on Instagram yet, but what like are you seeing younger and younger problems? Because you mentioned earlier like somebody is poorly, and I say it all the time, and they get complimented on their weight loss. People
Mhm.
don't know whether they're sick or have cancer or have an eating disorder. It's just the automatic thing. I personally do not compliment people.
Mm.
Even clients who I'm working with, if they do get a physical transformation, I don't like parade it and I don't put it on the
Yeah,
gram and
yeah.
look at my client in her knickers. I'm like, come on, she's a grown woman like ours.
Yeah.
Let's not feed the machine.
Undignified, yeah.
Yeah. Are you seeing like younger and younger people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most of my younger clients, I can think of a few cases over the years in, in more recent history, they don't realize that their obsession with whatever the metric might be, whether it's body fat percentage or the way that their physique looks or their weight or whatever it might be, they don't realize that that is a fixation, that it's an unhealthy fixation. One of the hardest conversations that I have in my clinics, and it could be with someone of any age whatsoever, is you don't need me to help you lose weight, you need help for an eating disorder. That's a really tough clinical conversation to have, and that person could be 6 stone or they could be 16 stone or 26 stone. It doesn't matter what their weight is, it's about the behaviors and the thoughts and feelings that are going alongside it. And obviously that's not my role to fix, that's a psychologist's role or psychotherapist role, but it's a difficult thing. It can come up at any time in people's lives, and one of the things that you and I have in common is working with these people who've been dieting for 30 years unsuccessfully and hate themselves and have wasted so much of their time, energy, and mental capacity on hating their bodies and obsessing about what they are or aren't going to eat that week. It's a tragedy, really.
And often money as well.
Yeah.
Like one of my clients, for example, went to Turkey or somewhere and got a balloon fitted,
Mm,
and obviously eventually had it took out
mm,
and, regained the weight. And
yeah,
it's just another kind of nail in the
yeah,
failure coffin. And
yeah,
when you go to that extreme, and that's meant to be the last extreme,
yeah,
you I feel like I'm bringing on these people. And you mentioned like eating disorders and like disordered eating.
mm,
Like I use them separately
yeah,
because eating disorders have to meet a certain
yeah,
criteria, right? But I see so many people with disordered eating, like on the spectrum,
yeah,
some higher up. What are your kind of thoughts in terms? Because I'm just like a humble nutritionist. I've done my intuitive eating course. I'm a certified personal trainer, but I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, and I like to think I've got like some, emotional intelligence about
yeah,
myself and how to speak to people compassionately and treat them with empathy. But also, they're giving out personal trainer and nutrition and certifications in cereal boxes these days.
yeah,
And all of a sudden, oh, such and such is a personal trainer, kind of going back to, oh, they're just a bodybuilder. So like everybody's being bracketed as like, right, they are in the health, fitness, nutrition space, go work with them, and all of a sudden that's actually adding fuel to the fire.
yeah.
What's your thoughts on the state of like the the entry point to work with people in terms of whether it's their physical or nutritional or mental health, and
Yeah.
what can even be done about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult and it's a mess. It's a mess on every front because people don't really know what different qualifications mean. People, as you say, you can go on a course and become a nutrition coach. You don't even need to do, you can call yourself a nutrition coach. Anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. It's a real mess out there. And I think the problem that I have is that it very often people fall into the hands of people who don't care about their mental health, who are, going to help them to achieve their body goals through whatever means necessary. And if they can't do it, they're going to tell them that they're a failure and it's their fault and they've got no self-control or whatever it might be. And that just feeds into a much bigger mental health picture. The issue is that you don't know what you don't know. None of us do. And so you can say something and be super confident about it. But in reality, if you don't know everything about that topic, you can end up causing a lot more harm than good. And it's usually unintentional, but certainly the risk is there. And, you and I were chatting before the podcast about some of these influencers who have blown up recently, who are spouting absolute nonsense and who anyone with any nutrition qualifications would know is nonsense, but they have huge followings and people are really compelled by them, but they don't have any nutrition qualifications or any education in that space. And it's just, it's a difficult and challenging space to be in at the moment, but I do have some hope that things will get better. I think that there probably will become better regulation on social media about what people should and shouldn't be saying. I think we saw through COVID that people, it's possible for Instagram to flag misinformation. So it should be possible for them to flag nutrition misinformation, or that someone's not qualified to be giving nutrition advice, for example. But it is a difficult time for sure. And I think the most important thing we can all do is try to educate people about who the safest and right people to see is at what time, and also really importantly for anyone working with people with nutrition problems to know what their scope of practice is. I work with lots of brilliant personal trainers who, when patients get, or then their clients, then they realize their clients are more complicated than they can manage, they'll send them to us in the clinic and we'll look after them and get them sorted. And if they want to go back to personal training, great. And equally, I'm not particularly interested in seeing patients who are healthy and have a good relationship with food, but just need to lose a few pounds or want to lose a few pounds for aesthetic purposes. It's not my bag. I don't, I'm not interested really. It's about, for me, it's about us all staying in our lanes to a certain extent, but without being, I don't know, dictatorial about that. I think it's an important part of it, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you're not sure, refer on and get help. But it's a difficult space because there's so many people that just want to hold on to their clients, even though they don't know what to do with them. And to be candid, I'm a member of some dietitian support groups where people are seeing patients that they have no idea what to do with, and are asking questions that if they did know what to do, they wouldn't need to ask those questions. And that also worries me, because when you're in private practice, you've got a responsibility to those patients and you're not working with a team. So it's a mess, but I think hopefully it will get better. And if we all work collaboratively, things can get even better for patients and people can be safer.
I mean, the fitness industry, the diet industry is kind of a mess. Do you still see, like, at that upper, people who are registered dietitians that are still have their biases and still promoting things that maybe are like unethical or not quite right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's two aspects to that. One is that we're in difficult financial times, and people may rely on their income from their private practice or from their social media. And that can then mean that if you get offered a job that is financially rewarding for you, but not necessarily the right thing ethically, it can still feel like you have to do that, or that you will take that work even if it's not the right thing to do. We've got a dietitian who historically has been on social media saying, don't, be careful about plant-based milks that are unfortified, whilst on TV talking about being careful with unfortified plant-based milks, whilst promoting unfortified plant-based milks on their Instagram, talking on TV about being careful with Monster energy drinks, etc., whilst promoting them on their Instagram. And like, you can see the problem, and I can understand why that's difficult, but it's a challenge to try and get around that for people. And now we also have doctors and professors and people in the nutrition who are from the non-nutrition space coming into the nutrition space and selling products and services that they're not really qualified to understand the nuance of. And that's also, massively problematic. So I think it exists everywhere, unfortunately, and it comes from both a place of financial need, but also perhaps some lack of knowledge and awareness of what's, actual science and facts behind what they're doing.
Hmm. How do you how can you identify like whether or not you are in diet culture? Because obviously I was in bodybuilding culture, and there's an awful lot of diet culture mixed into that. Like, it's, as I said, legitimized when you are kind of tracking every calorie to the gram, and eating everything that you have been allocated for that day and so on and so forth. So there's no intuition
Mm,
whatsoever. It's just right, macro Tetris, I used to call it. And
yeah.
um how do you know like you're in that culture, and when do you maybe need to start looking at how to get out of it?
Yeah, I think importantly, anyone who is telling you how much to eat, when to eat, what you should and shouldn't be eating, all of that is diet culture, right? And I think, if I'm saying to people, eat kiwis for constipation, it's a bit different to someone saying only eat kiwis because they're the best thing ever, right? And you have to be careful about the nuance of what you're saying, and we have to be responsible. But ultimately, anyone who is telling you what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat is steering you away from listening to your body. Equally, anyone who's telling you have to work out X amount of times a week, even if you're exhausted, even if you didn't sleep at night because of the kids, all this kind of stuff, it's about trying to support people to listen to their bodies a bit more. And from a sort of social media aspect, I think really importantly, anyone who you notice that you're spending a bit more time looking at their body, comparing your body to their body, anything like that, I think we have to be careful of. And I think, my perspective is that we don't need to use our bodies or the before and after photos of other people's bodies to sell our knowledge and our experience, and to be able to kind of encourage people to join our services and be part of our services. I still see a lot of dietitians posing in gym gear, or in very little clothing at all, and things like that. And I think it does us all a bit of a disservice, because in fact we don't need to use the shape and size of our bodies to promote our mental aptitude and our ability to help people. I think it's I think there's lots of things that we have to be careful of. One of them is and the other thing is like selling stuff to people, right? What are you selling? What are you trying to sell me, is a thing to look out for when you're looking at diet culture. But anyone who's steering you away from listening to your own body and being intuitive with your diet, exercise, sleep, etc., is probably the one to keep an eye out for. And that is going to count most people who are in that space off your list of people to follow.
Mm. So I find that like really challenging for me, because like I built my body over many, many years of training, and like n- disordered. I don't know that, like I look back and I think like I wasn't that bad, but also I was like, yeah, you kind of were a little bit. But obviously I built a physique.
Yeah.
I'm now primarily I just eat intuitively, but I still train with weights.
Mhm.
So like my body fat percentage typically is just where it naturally sits, but I've grown an appreciable amount of muscle. So I can't help the way that I look,
Yeah.
but I don't also want to kind of be promoting and pushing that, and I also don't want to put people off. So
Yeah.
even me, I've got myself in this little muddle of
Yeah.
like, right, I don't want to push this diet culture message. I don't want people to just look at me and put two and two together and go, oh, he's just going to have us eating chicken rice and broccoli and squatting every day.
Yeah, but I think that's where you use your social media for good and not evil. And I think it's sometimes about actually how much clothes are you wearing? Are you posing in front of the mirror? Are you doing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
when you're dehydrated and actually you've starved yourself for 3 days, or are you doing that to be, in your normal self? I think there's lots of things that you can do. And I think if you're telling people to eat broccoli and rice on repeat, then we're already in trouble, right? But I know you're not doing that. So
No.
there's lots of things that you do really well, but I think it's always worth us checking ourselves to make sure we're not doing anything that feeds into the rhythm. But equally, I've got a good friend in nutrition who is brilliant at what she does, and she says you have to sell people what they think they want, but give them what they need. And by that she means, the way that she promotes her business might sound like she's going to teach you about how to diet, when in reality she teaches you about your relationship with food. I get it as a marketing I get it as a marketing technique, but it's not something I would be comfortable with. But I don't think she's necessarily wrong.
Yeah, I've heard that message 100 times, well, more than that, and I'm just kind of like, oh, it doesn't quite sit with
All
me,
right with
that
you.
one. I don't feel like if I'm posing with my abs out, or like
Yeah.
after just done an upper body session
Yeah.
and posing with a stringer on, or I don't wear stringers anymore, not for like 15 years. But yeah, and by the way, people can eat chicken rice and broccoli if they do wish to,
Oh yeah,
that, and
just
that's
repeat every day, please.
just not every day at every meal. What is it? Fish and rice cakes. Um, that meme. Um, I wanted to kind of like go over some of I think the popular or things that are at the forefront in diet culture at the minute, and just get some of your thoughts, whether there is some positives to it, or whether I mean, it's like anything that can be taken too far,
Yeah.
if they used during particular circumstances. I mentioned off the air just before, on Facebook, someone clearly selling
Yeah.
skinny jabs, semi-glutide, what's the word?
Ozempic. Yeah.
Ozempic, that's the one. Like, what's your thoughts with that? Because that's fairly new, right? What's the
Yeah.
like the long-term effects of them, or is it not quite known yet?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we don't know the long-term physical health effects, I would say. We work now with increasing numbers of patients who are either on Ozempic or are considering trying these weight loss injections. Those who are on them are just terrified of coming off them and gaining weight again, which inevitably most people will unless they're carefully looked after. We see lots of patients who are on them and are living on crisps and, a few bits of snacks here and there because they've got no appetite. So they're not interested in food and they just pick up whatever's easiest, and they're just still, grazing on foods that perhaps we would be able to encourage them to reduce in their diet if we could balance the diet in a better way, and support them better. And essentially it's not teaching you in any way to listen to your body. It's teaching you, that your appetite is bad, and if you're hungry it's bad, and it's a difficult thing. I can see the benefits of their application in intractable diabetes and in conditions where things are really difficult for people. But the vast majority of patients that I see for weight management or for support with their diet, it's not that their appetite's out of control, it's just that they're so caught up in diet culture and what they should and shouldn't be eating that they're heavily restricting one day, and then they're struggling to keep on top of things, and that's really normal, and we don't need something that suppresses our appetite to help to manage that. It's about psychology, right? So I think they're here to stay. I really hope that they stop being available on Facebook and through your beautician and through whoever else is kind of kicking around with jabs in their car, because they need to be carefully considered and they're not for everybody. And it's been fascinating and terrifying to see the impact of these medications on celebrities like the Kardashians, for example, who've gone from mainly being heralded for their curves, real or fake, however you view it, to now being heralded for being skinny, and that's become the new trend, right? To be as skinny as possible. And that's partly because a lot of these celebrities are using Ozempic off license and off script because they were never overweight to start with. So it's an interesting time. I think it will get better regulated, but at the moment it's all very much a mess. And I would just really encourage anyone who's considering them or who's on them to speak to a registered dietitian and get some support with that journey, because it's not easy to come off them. It's not easy being on them, and some of the side effects are really unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, I liken it to people who have known taking performance enhancers
Mm-mm.
and they've had to come off them because of whatever reasons. Basically, they've knocked themselves up.
Yeah.
They've gotten gyno as well, and all of these other things. They're putting these chemicals in the body without any care because, and it's like their entire body was just built upon this drug.
Yeah.
And once it stopped, like obviously in the case of Ozempic, maybe put weight back on, the appetite returns, the what the hell effect kicks in, I might as well. I've
Yeah.
knocked it now.
Yeah.
So the the binge eat to a point where maybe they're in a heavier place.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the drugs, with the performance enhancing drugs that just
Yeah.
lose themselves completely with huge amounts of depression, which is it's just so hard to see. With the Ozempic, because you mentioned that people lose appetite quite significantly, does that mean like they of course lose a lot of muscle mass at the same
Yeah,
time?
yeah. So the vast majority of people in the trials who lost weight lost muscle mass and fat mass. It's not just, you can't preserve. If you're not eating at all, you're not fueling your muscle, you're not going to maintain it. And if you're not eating at all, you're probably not going to feel like exercising or going out. But if you are trapped in that cycle of thinking that thinness is the priority above anything else, then you're just going to be sat on your sofa thinking, I'm not eating anything and I'm losing weight and I'm happy about that, rather than thinking really about body composition, especially if you've bought these drugs from online. You're not getting support with
Yeah.
them. You're not kind of, getting the psychological or dietary support that you really need with this kind of stuff. I really like that link, that analogy of them being like steroids and like performance enhancing drugs. I think that's a very, very pertinent point, because perhaps for some people who are considering them, that's a really good thing to understand, is that, yeah, short term you might get the body that you want, but long term you're going to struggle and you've got to come off them at some point. And what does that look like for you? And I can imagine that must be really difficult for people who've used performance enhancing drugs or steroid type drugs to build muscle mass, because you're going to lose it on the other side of that, and that must be really hard for people.
Yeah, I mean the gift of YouTube's algorithms sent a couple of documentaries my way of like people who were selling these things and the needles they're made in people's
Scary.
kitchens, and you're like, oh my God. And one guy was saying the majority of his client base, and I'll send you the link, was aged between 16 and 24, and he's
Oh God.
unfortunately as well, he's a Geordie. So I'm like, oh no, that's not
No.
us. Anyway, back to the diet stuff. Like There's a few things that I don't know which is more popular at the minute. So I'll go with this one first. Intermittent fasting.
Yeah. Look, I think if you're someone who wakes up and you don't feel hungry until midday, and I think that's kind of fine. Skipping breakfast, it's not a magic, there's no magic to intermittent fasting, right? It's as though someone's finally found the elixir of life when really you're just skipping meals. I just don't understand how it's become such a thing. Of course, if you skip meals, you're going to lose weight. Is it the right way of doing things? Not necessarily. When I see intermittent fasting getting toxic is when people fast until 1, 2 o'clock, for example, and then they'll end up essentially binging because they're so hungry at that point that they've got no rational thought process behind what they're going to eat for that breaking their fast meal. And then the other thing is and it's often men, unfortunately, who will basically say, well, I don't eat after 6 p.m. So I'm no longer eating with my family. I no longer go out for meals with my friends. I don't eat with my partner anymore. I finish eating at 6 p.m. and that's the end of it. And that obviously that inability to eat socially, to be flexible with your food, to be able to enjoy food at all, really, that's a real problem, and it can really, pull apart families and cause real harm. So I basically feel very strongly that if you just don't feel hungry until midday, fine, just think about what you're going to eat for your first meal and plan that a little bit, because you will be hungry psychologically even if you're not physically hungry, and don't be inflexible with it. So if you notice one day you are hungry at 11 or 10 or 9 or 8, just eat something. It doesn't have to be strict or tied up in any strict rules about when you should or shouldn't eat. And I think, like, the way that it's been touted as though it's going to save your life and prevent you from getting cancer and extend your brain age and cure your gut health problems, all of that is nonsense, right? There's no evidence for that in humans. That's all just in rat trials, and that, we're not rats, we're much more complex creatures. And ultimately, it's still being sold by doctors and all sorts of other people as though it's like this magic thing, when it's not. There was a intermittent fasting doctor on one of the big podcasts recently. I'm not going to name it because I don't want people to go and find it, but he was saying calorie deficits don't work. Calorie deficit will not help you to lose weight. Calorie deficit is nonsense. Energy in, energy out is nonsense. You have to do intermittent fasting to lose weight. And either he doesn't understand that intermittent fasting creates a calorie deficit and that's why it works, in which case that's terrifying because he's a doctor, or he's purposefully just misleading people to stop them believing anybody else but himself, in which case he's a narcissist, and that's also an issue, right? But it's this held up as though it's going to solve everyone's problems, when in reality it can also cause quite significant eating disorders and disordered eating in people when it carries on for too long or when it's too strict.
Yeah, like I've spoke to my clients, and I was like, let's just avoid labels completely.
Yeah.
If you say do miss a meal, say the first meal of the day because your just appetite isn't there, it's not intermittent fasting. You
Listen
listening
to
to
your
your
body.
body. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like everybody needs to, like, I've got clients and other clients or other people will ask them, the friends and family, oh, what you doing, expecting a label.
Yeah, sure.
And it's just like, oh, I'm just doing what I want.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's great. That's
Yeah, great.
literally it. You eat what you want,
Yeah.
and I think people worry about that term. Well, we'll get on to intuitive eating. I've noticed as well, well, I noticed, I probably was part of it for my shame, the tracking calories.
Yeah.
You mentioned there energy deficit, calorie deficit, and I think that gets confused with energy in tracking calories in and calories out, even to a certain extent of like using Fitbits and these
Mhm.
other external kind of things, which are nowhere near accurate,
Mhm.
from my understanding anyway, and getting kind of transfixed on the energy balance equation. What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that the sort of MyFitnessPal revolution is dying a death, because it was telling women to eat 1,200 calories a day, which is less than what a 12-year-old needs. Um, I think to a certain extent, some people some of the time benefit from understanding where all the energy is coming from in their diet, because there is still a subset of people that are, buying a massive latte with loads of syrups in it and stuff like that, and wondering why they're struggling with their weight regulation. But it's the few and far between. Most people know that eating more fruits and vegetables is going to help them with their energy balance, and that eating less processed food, less, less of the higher fat foods, higher carbohydrate foods, for example, is going to help them to regulate their energy balance a bit better. I usually use the analogy, everyone knows that cake is not as good for you as eating an apple, right? And it's not that you should never eat cake, it's just that it's got more calories in it, and we need to perhaps be a bit aware of that if we're struggling with our weight management, or it's something we want to prioritize for whatever reason. The thing is with calorie tracking is it's wildly inaccurate, and it leads to people making decisions like, for example, oh, I've got 10 calories left, what can I eat for 10 calories? When in reality, you're probably 25% above or below that in the first place. So it's a blunt instrument for a difficult and challenging job, and it's not ideal for most people. And I worry about these people, and I'm sure you've worked with them as well, Ian, who have been tracking their calories for years and years and years. One of the nicest, like, biggest changes or things that I feel I've helped somebody with in my whole career was this lovely girl who I worked with for a few months, who had tracked everything she'd eaten and calculated the calories every day for about 5 years, and she had this little book which had it all in it, and she didn't really feel safe unless she had a little book with her. And eventually she just said to me, I burnt my book yesterday. And I was just delighted for her,
Wow.
because the fact that she was able to get rid of that was life-changing for her. It was like a noose around her neck, and I think the more we can encourage people to listen to their bodies, to recognize their calorie needs and their energy needs change every day, and to respond to that, the further away we get from having to use instruments like calorie counting to get people where they think they need to be.
Do you notice as well, kind of diet stacking going on? So when people have been sort of intermittent fasting, but now they know about calorie deficits, and also maybe there's issues with sugar and carbs and
Yeah.
all of these other things. Do you notice
Yeah.
like there's maybe three or four things going on rather than just the one?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm like on a low carb intermittent fasting thing.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
what you hear all the time. And what does that even mean? It's a complicated thing. I don't know. I hope it will get better, but at the moment it just feels like it's getting worse. Alongside, I'm trying to continually measure my blood glucose, and I'm,
I was going to ask you about
in my
those.
microbiome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're fasting with your patch on.
Yep.
Um, is it Davina? Is she pushing them?
Davina's doing
I know the
it.
other guy with the big podcast is as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what's going on with them? Because it's blood glucose, right? It's meant to go up and down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think with a continuous blood glucose monitoring, which is, for those who don't know, is the little round patches you will have seen on the backs of people's arms. It's becoming more and more popular, and we see lots of yellow ones in London walking around, and we'll see even more of it in the summer, I suspect, once people's got their coats off. Continuous blood glucose monitoring means that you can watch what your blood glucose does through the day. And as Ian says, it's really important to recognize that you are supposed to have fluctuations in your blood glucose levels. It's completely normal. Your body's designed to handle it, and it's what we've been existing with for decades. It's just that now people are tracking them. And there are very unscrupulous characters out there telling us, and what we would call pathologizing, so making it like a medical issue if you have fluctuations in your blood glucose, even if it's within the normal range. And for me, obviously the upshot of that is they're then selling you products and diets potentially to stop those glucose spikes, as they call them, when in reality they're just normal changes in your blood glucose that are natural, healthy, fine, nothing to worry about. You'll notice, for example, if you eat a banana, you might have an increase in your blood sugar that's more significant than if you ate some fried chicken. Does that mean the fried chicken's better for you than the banana? Obviously not, but not necessarily if you're just going with those readings, right? People, if you eat an apple, you'll get a bigger blood glucose reading than if you ate a stick of butter. But hopefully everyone knows that eating a stick of butter is worse for you than eating an apple, but not necessarily, because it feeds into this whole keto culture and the
Hmm.
high fat, low carb stuff and all those kinds of that kind of nonsense, which is just being perpetuated by this kind of stuff. So I would say in clinical practice, sometimes continuous blood glucose monitoring is really helpful, but it's really important to do it with a healthcare professional that knows what they're doing with the interpretation of those results, so that you don't think that eating butter is better for you than eating an apple.
Yeah. I mean, I always talk to people. I'm like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Do you want
Yeah,
to be still plugging things into MyFitnessPal when you go into the chip shop? It's like a little 60-year-old,
yeah.
or, fasting, or carrying this patch around on your arm? Or do you want to be kind of like, I was going to ask you this just because of I don't want to be seen as biased, the intuitive eating space. Because like anything, I am a certified intuitive eating like facilitator counselor, but I know fine well, even in that culture, it has its extremists. So what are your thoughts on the overall intuitive eating stuff?
Oh, I think it's the most positive sort of movement we've had in the diet space and the nutrition space for decades, really. I think it's creating a space for people to listen to their bodies and understand, and also to let go of the weight stigma that they carry against themselves and potentially against other people as well. I think anything that can support people to make peace with the shape and size of their bodies and to eat in a way that is natural to them and feels good to them is really positive. We critiques of the intuitive eating space would say, well, you're telling everyone just to eat donuts all day, and that's just obviously not the case. And then people who take it to the extreme maybe are eating donuts all day and saying, well, I'm intuitive eating and that's how it is. I think, the reality of it is, in a healthy, balanced mind and body, your body wants vegetables, your body wants to drink water, your body wants to eat regularly and do all the things that, if you care for your body because you don't hate your body, you'll take care of your body better than if you hate your body and you're trying to starve it or put it into a different shape, form, whatever it might be. And I think ultimately the intuitive eating space is hugely positive, or 99% positive, 1% toxic, just like everything else, right?
It's like nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
Which I mean is part of learning intuitive eating, that nothing is perfect. You're trying to live by the clock, you're trying to hit your numbers perfectly. And there's a lot of entitled eating going on. So you're eating, regardless of hunger and
Yeah.
fullness levels.
Yeah.
Intuitive eating is kind of underpinned by 10 principles. And the
Yeah.
principles, and I always say to clients, like intuition is intuition, and you've probably had it if you've been dieting for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, you probably just don't even know where to start, and it's quite
Absolutely.
overwhelming.
Yeah. And you don't trust yourself. I think that's the thing that perpetual yo-yo dieting or perpetual dieting does to you, is it teaches you not to trust yourself. Don't trust your appetite. You're not supposed to be hungry now. It's 4 o'clock. You've just eaten. It teaches you not to trust yourself on portion sizes because you're supposed to weigh out everything and see what's doing. And intuitive eating is basically trying to relearn trusting yourself. And that's not easy. It's not easy because a lot of people haven't had that maybe since they were a small child. And even when you were a child, you were probably told to finish what's on your plate and no, you can't have a snack now. And essentially, you're trying to teach people to listen to their bodies and to trust themselves to make decisions about food. And people find that very difficult. And I think, there are people who go, okay, I want to do intuitive eating, but in reality, they need a lot of work in the background before they're ready to get there. And that's okay too. And that's all a step on the journey, and it's an important one to take.
Yeah, I think that's why it's often so important. Yes, you can do it like most things on your own, but it's always great to work alongside somebody who can help you explore those thoughts and feelings around food. And ultimately, I just say to people, all I'm doing is just giving you a skill set that you can take into the rest of your life. Because the ebbs and flows of life are going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen in your life, but if you've got this like foundational relationship, positive relationship with food and yourself, and you're in tune with your emotions and your body's feedback systems, that you're able to just navigate things a lot more freely rather than, trying to stick square pegs into round holes,
Yeah.
trying to track your calories whilst also, you're crazy busy at work, you've got kids, you've got all of these other pressures going on. It's like the inevitable consequence is going to be that fuck it moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And I think that people, I think, don't believe it's going to work. They think, oh no, I can't do that. I can't listen to my body. My body will tell me to eat biscuits and cakes all the time. And one of the things that is worth remembering is if anyone's ever been on like an all-inclusive holiday, or you've been on away, oh, Christmas time is a great example. We've only recently had Christmas. After Christmas, everyone's a bit like, God, I just really want to eat some vegetables and some salad. And that's kind of how you feel all the time when you're intuitive eating properly, is like, I could eat that, but actually
yeah,
I'll eat this instead because it's
and that's
here.
it. Like, yeah, like it's when we said earlier, it's like eating what you want. And yeah, it's like it is genuinely eating what you want, but the diet mentality, which is principle number one, which is rejecting that diet mentality, which
Yeah.
is so hard for people who have got nothing but a diet mentality to see everything through this lens. But once that fog starts to clear, it's like, oh my God, like actually. And I think one of the things that people worry about is because of diet culture and the maybe fat phobia, the stigma that's attached to like the risk of weight gain. Is that
Yeah.
something that you see as like really the thing getting between them and doing that?
Yeah, it certainly can be. I think people sometimes just have an incredibly complicated relationship with food, and they need to, maybe they've literally never in their life been able to trust themselves around food for whatever reason. Maybe they had a very controlling parent who said you can or can't do this or whatever it might be. And sometimes we do need to do a bit of groundwork in terms of supporting that and releasing some of that, those beliefs, those sort of firmly held beliefs. It's it's not always as straightforward as going, okay, now we're just going to switch you from 30 years of dieting to intuitive eating. As you know, it takes a step-by-step process, and it's not always straightforward. But people are terrified of gaining weight, and that's a real
Mm.
shame, because alongside that weight gain often comes enjoying eating with your friends, having that extra glass of wine, being able to eat socially, staying asleep instead of getting up for your 5 a.m. workout, all of these things that are actually going to enhance and enrich your life in multiple other ways. But the fear of the weight gain can stand in the way, even if that is you regaining weight to a place where you're naturally supposed to be, and that you are actually really comfortable and that's really easy to maintain. You don't have to think about it all the time. Your brain works better, your periods are better, all these kinds of things click into place when you're at that weight you're supposed to be. But fear of weight gain through intuitive eating is definitely a problem for people, I think.
Mm. It's sometimes when the disordered eating it becomes so problematic that you're almost willing to let that go because it's having such a negative impact on
Yeah,
every facet of your life. And to a certain extent, it's letting go of the weight. And I'll just say to most people, I'm like, often the weight is a result of overconsumption through the inability to stick to
100%.
the rules.
Yeah.
It's just re
And
it's
yeah, one of the things I'll say to people is, you think you're going to gain a load of weight by through intuitive eating, but actually the problems that you're having at the moment is that let's say, for example, you're the main thing that you're struggling with in terms of regulating your weight is eating loads of biscuits at 4 o'clock, right? Just in the office, they're all there, you can't control yourself. And the reason that you can't control yourself, you feel you can't control yourself, is because you put them on this massive pedestal. And actually, if you said to yourself, I can have those biscuits, but let me eat some fruit first and see how I feel. Or you can have those biscuits, but oh, I've got this snack in my bag, let me eat that first. Actually, if you could solve that one problem, you wouldn't have such a problem with your weight. And that's like the binge cycle is the thing. You've had this tiny little salad for lunch and you're surprised you're hungry at 4 o'clock. I mean, it's normal,
yeah.
it's natural, right? It's trying to unpick it with people and find the example of where things are getting difficult and how you can fix that one piece. Because often people are doing loads of good stuff with their diet. It's not like they're going from eating, I don't know, a diet that would be really unhealthy for you to something that feels uncomfortable to them. It's more like you're doing lots of good stuff. There's just a couple of things here we can work on. And the best way to work on that is improving your relationship with food and feeding yourself properly.
Yeah, I always say it like to people that the major thing like most people are lacking is just confidence.
Yeah. And
Because there
trust in
is,
themselves.
yeah, confidence and trust because there's such there's narrative and commentary about what somebody's eating. Oh, are you eating all of that? Oh, should you be eating that? Oh, I thought you were being good. You know, all of this sort of stuff, especially if I tell my clients, I'm like, just don't tell anyone you're working with
Yeah.
us. I was like, maybe not the best marketing in the world. Maybe that's what I'm struggling with. But I'm like, let's not make this a thing. And
Mm,
also like dissuade them from using scales and
yeah.
before and after pictures. I'm like, right, if it sounds and looks like diet culture,
Yeah.
probably
Cut
want to
out.
go the opposite way.
Yeah, that's what you're dieting from. I think one of the things I find really useful with my clients, I really feel very strongly, and I don't know whether you agree with me, but I really feel very strongly it's about the way that diet culture erodes your trust in yourself and your self-belief that you are capable of choosing what your body wants, and get feeding your body and nourishing your body effectively, without eating too much, maybe, and without eating too little. We just don't trust ourselves to do that. And one of the things I find really useful with my clients is to highlight all the other places in their life where they trust themselves to be a good mum, trust themselves to maybe hold up a really high powered career, they trust themselves to be a good friend, they trust themselves to be a good daughter, family member, whatever it might be. but you don't trust yourself to feed yourself, and trying to bring some of that self-belief they have in other areas of their life into their relationship with food, I think is really important and makes a big difference. People go, oh yeah, actually, of course I can trust myself. Of course I know what I'm doing. It's the challenge. And the other thing I would say, just briefly, is when we have been dieting for a long time and you want to eat a biscuit, for example, and you feel like you're not in control, you might say, one of the things I say is that women and people go from eating a biscuit to I'm a complete failure, I've fucked everything up, I might as well give up, all this kind of stuff, go in this massive self-doubt spiral just from eating a biscuit. And of course, when you eat some biscuits, sometimes you want another biscuit. And I think the thing with this is about how would you talk to a child about it? Like if you've got a child with you and the child says, can I have another biscuit? You can say, well, you can, but why don't we go and play first? Why don't we go and do this first? You wouldn't say, you greedy little horrible little thing, you're a complete failure for wanting another biscuit. What's wrong with you, right? We have to try and find that like nurturing parent voice in us for ourselves and take care of our relationship with food in that way and our bodies in that way, because that's the key to getting it all unpicked and all that horrible pressure that we've put on ourselves over the years sorted.
Yeah, that self-compassion is just so important. And crazy enough, like funnily enough, I'll just say there's only so much like there is really to know about nutrition.
Yeah.
Like just yes, if there's more complex stuff, this is where you do need to go down and maybe speak to specialists and dietitians. But like your average Joe and Jane nutritionist personal trainer, if they're starting to delve into, for example, gut health, I'm like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
quite comfortable in saying that, like, hey, yes, have a diverse range of food, but if like people are going down like FODMAPs, I'm like, do that alongside
Yeah.
a dietitian. Just
Yeah.
because I've said FODMAP, fermentable Ollie, whatever, disaccharide. Like if they can't say that with confidence,
Yeah.
then that's probably a sign that they shouldn't
Yeah.
be putting you on a low FODMAP diet. But I think as well, if people are listening, it is really, to a certain extent, their responsibility, right, to do their due diligence, because to a certain extent, you can't just put on your Facebook wall, anyone know a good personal trainer, and then they get 100 comments off personal trainers' mates, like tagging the bro
Yeah.
in. And it's
Yeah.
like, are they a good personal trainer, or do they just have the level 3? Like, please, like, go to a website. If they've got a website, if they've got testimonials, is it just more diet culture bullshit?
Yeah.
Like, if it's full of before and after pictures, and like, make sure that it's something that you're going to, are they pushing a dieting agenda? Like, do they have a system?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the magic whatever, like, the 3-step whatever. I know it's marketing and things like that. It's just something I'm not really happy about doing.
No, I agree. Yeah, and I think, check out their social media. What are they sharing? Is it stuff that you feel comfortable with, or are they using their body to sell you something? Because ultimately your appearance, your physique is not synonymous with your health, and health and aesthetics really can't be mixed up. It's not the same thing.
Sophie, I've taken so much of your time and I really appreciate it. There's so much more. I could go on forever just talking about this. We'll get you on talking about guts and butts
Yeah, I'd love that.
one day. Yeah, you can teach me a thing about guts and butts. But before I let you go, is there anywhere people can go find you and find out more about what you do and so on?
Yeah, cool. So my socials are all at Sophie Dietitian. Dietitian spelled with 2 T's or 3 T's, maybe even, not a C. So keep an eye out for that. If you Google my name, Sophie Medlin, I'll come up and you'll be able to watch the Channel 4 show. You'll be able to go to our clinic website and book yourself in, and you'll find all my socials that way as well.
Amazing. I'll put everything in the show notes. But yeah, honestly, thank you so much. I've had an absolutely amazing time. And yeah, catch you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Sophie, for joining us. I have literally, I don't even know why I've said that. Like, I just have. Yes, I have put her details in the show notes. I've also put my details in the show notes. So if you want a free diet scorecard, that's just going to assess where you are right now in terms of your relationship, behaviors around food, body image concerns and all that. And it'll just give you a score. off the back of that, also, you'll just get some freebies. Who doesn't like some freebies? Yeah, just help give you a bit better structure and understanding around your nutrition and diet and thoughts and processes and all of that sort of stuff. What I would love for you to do is give this a share. Give this podcast a share. Even better, help the algorithm, because ultimately it might help the next person who doesn't know I exist. Give it a review, 5 stars. Write something nice if you're listening on Apple. Once again, a huge thank you to Sophie. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.